At what point did being a protectionist they're saying he's a protectionist as if it's a bad thing, i.e. putting America first, for example. I mean, I'm concerned as an Australian to hear our senators saying that that's a problem, right?
Well, there's certainly possibility of retaliation, right? Because tariffs are very useful if you're the much more powerful country and the bigger country against some little country, right? But China and the US are pretty much on equal footing these days, right? So that's why China's not so afraid.
So this is the guy that's leading the free world, Sav. How do you feel about that?
No comment. No, I'm kidding. Look, I'm a little disappointed, to say the least, but, we're just going to have to roll with it.
Going to have to roll. And this is going to be an interesting episode of Property Now. Probably the greatest episode ever.
I love it. Can you say the one about cats and dogs?
They're eating cats, they're eating dogs.
There's a guy that, is it Shane Gillis? I think that
he's so good. He does very well.
Man. He's actually better than Trump. Like he
Is
impersonates Trump better than Trump himself.
There's another guy that does the 3 Trump impersonations. He's like, there's some people impersonate Trump like this. And he's so good looking. Yeah, so good. I sound amazing in my mind, but I'm going to watch this back.
It's not bad.
Man, Jamie Foxx does a pretty good impersonation.
Too,
yeah. Really?
Jamie Foxx, does a really good Trump impersonation.
Well, I mean,
I'll be Googling this after.
Yeah.
Do you have one? Sexiest voice in podcasting? Do you have a Trump impersonation?
No, I don't. I'm not even going to try.
Jason He, great guy. Sexiest voice in podcast.
That's good.
So obviously we're welcome to Property Now. I'm Michael Carboni. You can call me Carbs, the terrible Trump impersonist, whatever
Trump.
the word is. No, don't call me Trump. I'm sure he's going to do a great job. But today we're talking about how will Trump's policies, now that he is the American president, will his policies have an effect on the Australian property market? Could be divisive. Sav, put the chair down, Sav. Put the chair down.
How do you feel, Sav?
Yeah, could be a big topic.
A bit on edge,
Chris, your idea, you really wanted to talk about this today?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting one to see what effect a Trump 4-year term presidency can have on the Australian property market. We know that if one thing we know about Trump is that he's going to be mysterious and very unknown with his policies, and that's probably what everyone is thinking at the moment, because it doesn't come into effect. Well, he's not actually in office until early next year, 2025. So everyone from now until then is going to be speculating about what is he going to do, what policies are he going to put in place, what tariffs is he going to impose, is he going to end the wars? I think he said, if you elect me, I'm going to 24 hours, the wars will be over.
Yeah, they're all over, all of them.
So
What?
The good news, what's good as well,
there's
is
a lot there.
Historically, we've seen him in office before, so maybe we can make some comparisons as well. So it's going to be, I don't know where this convo is going. I have notes. It's blank. There's actually no notes here. It's just for looks. This conversation could go anywhere. But we might start with a video that we just watched 5 minutes before walking in, or I just watched 5 minutes before we walked into this room. Some of you guys may be watching this for the first time. It's from the AFR. Peach, can you hit the video? Let's watch this and let's take the conversation from there.
Love it.
So this was the morning after Trump gets in. Question to Governor Bullock in the Senate.
We've all woken up this morning with the sobering and, for some people, actually a terrifying reality of a Donald Trump presidency in the US.
This guy's on team, so
he's an economic extremist, an unstable wrecking ball in perhaps the most influential position in the entire global economy. His policies are highly protectionist. They're highly expansionary, particularly in terms of tax cuts, particularly for people at the top end who are already very wealthy. He's promising a 60% tariff on goods produced in China, which is Australia's largest trading partner, plus tariffs on products from everywhere else around the world, including Australia. Surely you did some work before yesterday to advise the government on what the impacts of a Trump presidency would be on monetary policy in Australia and the exchange rate for the Australian dollar. Surely you did that work.
We have said earlier, we have a broad understanding of the way some of these policies, if they are implemented, will work out. But we haven't done very explicit scenario analysis on what it might mean for monetary policy, because there's things going in all sorts of directions here. it might be inflationary in some ways, but it might be deflationary in other ways if China ends up badly affected by this and that badly affects us. So it's not easy to dissect what's going to happen with all of this,
No, I'm not
particularly as we don't know what's going to happen, Senator, with respect. He says he's going to do certain things. He doesn't actually take up duties until next year. We'll wait and see what's going to happen.
So, Ms. Bullock, is what you're telling us today that the RBA didn't take the policy announcements of someone who was at least a good chance to become the US president in one of the most influential positions in the entire global economy, that his presidency is going to send shockwaves through the global economy? If we're saying the RBA didn't actually look at his policies and consider what implications they might have for things that are in your remit, monetary policy,
Yes, we did.
exchange rate.
We did, and we have looked at what it might mean. I think our initial feeling is that if he does some of what he said, so some of his 10% tariffs and his expansion in spending and so on, that maybe it doesn't have a lot of implications for us. If he does some more extreme things, maybe it does. But again, Senator, I think people have this feeling that this is a very precise and mechanical process, that you take these inputs and you put them into a model and it churns out this is what you must do with monetary policy in these circumstances. It doesn't work like that.
That's your job, isn't
Forecasting,
it?
no, that's actually
Take a whole
not how
bunch
it
of
works.
complex realities and distill it down to the blunt instrument of interest.
Let's stop it there, Paige.
Yeah, he gets a bit
Um,
ridiculous.
Interesting, right? And in my opinion, it's kind of unfair questioning because the RBA isn't meant to predict what's going to happen and make decisions based on what might happen. They're meant to work off
They
existing
do model
data.
things out to see
They would,
where it's
they
going.
would model it out, but they're not making decisions based on that. The decisions are based on what's happening at the moment or what has happened in, the recent quarter. But it does raise the question, like, what could this mean for our dollar, for Australian property? And Chris, I know you...
Definitely, I mean, to touch on some of the comments was Nick made, the senator there. I mean, at what point did being a protectionist of they're saying he's a protectionist as if it's a bad thing, i.e. putting America first, for example. At what point, I mean, I'm concerned as an Australian to hear our senators saying that that's a problem.
A bad thing, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Are you not putting Australia first? Is that not what you're elected to do? Or are you looking at the global? I understand there's trade and there's politics. I get that. But purely saying that he's a protectionist of America first. We all know Trump is immediately America first. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Right? I mean, to put your own country, which your people elect you for, is that a bad thing?
I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's the secrecy around policies and the cooperation and working together with other countries that makes it difficult to have an approach like that. I think it's the combination of different things that he does that makes...
When you say secrecy, what do you mean secrecy?
Well, that he's not very open about his policies towards the rest of the world.
But does he need to be?
Well, I suppose we're living in a global world, and there's trade, like what you're saying. There's different things that impact a country. Like
But I think the whole basis is, and this is probably going off, but the whole basis of what he's been elected for is to lead the people within that country. And at what point does it become, America is the enforcer or the protectioner of the world? At what point does that come to the detriment of your own people within your country?
Yeah, look, I think that's his appeal, right? Because I think every country, the politicians are protectionists, right? The policies that they're cooking up, that's not talked about in the media, are for the benefit and the interest of the country that they're from. But I think the appeal with Trump, personally, my opinion, is that he talks about it openly. Right. So going back to what you're saying, Sav, is that, the diplomacy of different countries, foreign relations, is that even though you're actually doing or putting in place policies that are protecting your own country, I think a lot of world leaders don't talk about it openly, so to avoid that conversation on the public level, But behind the scenes, that's what they're all doing. Like every country is doing stuff to protect their own interests.
He's just been very. He's actually.
That's
It's
right.
actually maybe the opposite of secrecy. He's actually going out there and talking on it. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, sort of gaslighting. Like not every Australian feels how that senator feels, and to say that everyone's waking up with a terrifying reality. At the end of the day, 72 or whatever it's up to at the moment, 72 million Americans voted for him.
Yeah, well, that's
So, I
that
mean-
shows that people are corresponding or like relating to that, right? And you can see that there's an article, I think, in the Sydney Morning Herald or the AFR talking about how this Trump victory is a bit of a warning for Albanese, is that people may be feeling the same way in Australia in next year's election, how they want someone to represent them who's more open, have the courage to actually talk about things in public, saying that I'm doing these things to protect the citizens of this country, rather than, not talking about it because you don't, you want to be politically correct, don't want to piss off certain groups of communities and so forth, right?
Yeah, look, he protects a certain group of people, though.
Yeah.
Like, it does go in combination with all the other things that he stands for. I think this is just one specific trait, and there's obviously more to his leadership that I think is concerning. But
Yeah, I think that's probably, it's hard to separate. I mean, there's been court cases and there's the issues with
Sexual
women
assaults.
and how he treats women. Obviously
Yes.
not the best by any means, right? I think that's probably why he's so polarizing.
yeah.
And that, is it hard to separate the personal from the professional with him? Do you find? So you look at him as a person, and then does that just turn you off anything that he has to say?
Yes, because he's setting an example for a country.
Yep.
And if you can have that as your background and still lead a country, I think that's concerning.
Very interesting. This is going in places I didn't expect it to go, but I go.
But I like the fact that people you can talk. I think there's a lot of people out there that, whether you're on Harris or Trump's side, that are afraid to talk. I think that's an issue as well. I remember 20 years ago, you never used to talk about who you voted for, right? Like, that was never talked about. But I think you need to be able to have discussions and respect each other's opinions on things and not get to that personal point. I mean, and Donald Trump doesn't do that very well at all, to be honest. But
it's definitely very divisive, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's highly
it's very-
divisive.
you see all the
Yes.
rhetoric coming out of America now, and there's a lot of celebrities. America is crazy in that, like, celebrities really get behind it. Like, you would never see.
It just
you
goes
know-
to show no one gives
Recently.
an absolute shit about
You
celebrities.
would never,
does
you
it?
would never see like Hamish Blake come out and say we're supporting
No.
Albanese, and if you don't, you're stupid. He would never say
Because the
that.
country is polarized,
Yeah,
right?
it's very
Like,
polarized.
it's-
So there's a lot of
Yeah.
celebrities, and
Well, everyone was sort of pushed to choose a side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Whereas in a lot of countries, at least in the Netherlands, you have to have a coalition of different parties. So it represents different parts of the country rather than just one party.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's really just the two major parties in the
Yes,
US, and
yeah.
there's nobody else.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
few under there, but they don't really
Yeah,
get
yeah.
any chance.
Yeah.
but conspiracy theories aside, he got in popular. Like he got in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
got
he
in-
won everything.
He,
What's the
he smashed
conspiracy
it.
theory aside? Well, I got it.
Oh no!
Oh.
If some people say, "Oh, it was rigged somehow," whatever.
Oh, yeah,
like,
what he
but
said last time when he
you-
lost.
you know, he's won 3 times now, Sav. So
He never left.
It's never happened-
Exactly.
it's never
He
happened
left.
before.
Technically, he's in his third term. Yeah, can't actually have a third term.
But I think there's certainly, look, this is getting very political, but I think certainly, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say this without like being too polarized.
Just say,
on
no,
myself.
just say it as it is.
Yeah,
Just-
but
it's okay.
let's look at his policies and objectively. Like, let's take out the whole, like, yeah, maybe I don't like him as a person, but let's look at his policies.
I would
and
say
how
definitely there's a majority that feel probably conservative at the moment. And when you talk about, you know, being patriotic towards your country and putting your country first, that's very conservative. And I think that, you know, typically there might be more conservative than not in most countries, or, you know, politically speaking. But that conservative voice has gotten louder and louder in recent years, whereas those types of people
I think they've been
would
forced
typically,
to come out.
yeah, they would typically be less likely to be loud, right? But now, like, being conservative is like, yeah, they're making noise because of the way the world might be heading. All right. So anyway, let's put the politics. Sav's getting
You're not
Sav-
going to so you're not going to put it aside in this chat. Just to be
Yeah,
clear.
okay.
But I
Let's
think
keep it.
just have a respect.
Like I
for
said,
Yeah.
yeah, let's
Yes.
have some respect
Yeah.
for both sides. Let's talk about his policies. What are some of the policies? Like, we've already spoken about, you know, foreign investment, and we've spoken about tariffs, for example, on China.
Well, he's got taxes, tariffs,
Yeah.
immigration,
Let's
a lot of these different
Let's talk
policies.
about, let's unpack some of the policies, and then let's think about, could that actually affect us? And Governor Bullock in the video, she's like, oh, look, it may not actually make an impact.
And look, just on the video, I mean, she was correct in her response. I mean, number one, he's not actually in office yet, so it's a couple of months away. So she can't actually model anything out at this point because she doesn't know what he's actually going to put in place. He's saying that he's talking of a 60% tariff on China, fine, but he hasn't put it
He hasn't
in
done it
place.
yet.
He hasn't done it.
But the other side of that is too, he might do that, okay, and we can model everything off what he might do, but then what's China going to do? Then then there's a whole nother
Whole
set of
nother-
modeling.
Exactly. You can't model.
Yeah.
You know, she's correct. You can't model like, all right, if Donald does what he says he's going to do, what does China do? We don't know what the response is going to be. And I think that's probably something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
oversimplifying it. You know,
Yeah.
you're just putting all these like 1,000 hypothetical scenarios and it's going to spit out all these outcomes. Yeah, just and he's thinking surely you have to be prepared for this, but yeah, like I think it's just taken a very simplified approach.
Unless they use that one computer that is out.
But that's
good
only
idea.
available at one bank.
Oh, the bank
yeah, yeah,
the bank
yeah.
still has that computer.
Yeah. Please.
But you're right. Like it's not like it's a magical spreadsheet. You just
Correct.
chuck all these inputs in, as she
Yeah.
said.
What we do have though is a history
History.
where we've got 4 years and we could see what he's done.
So
And
what
actually-
happened? What happened last time?
Well, there was a lot of
Stock market went up 300%.
Yes. It actually, and you know, aside from my personal views, it actually had a positive effect on Australia, which I think.
In which way, sir? Like
in which way? So I did have to do some research, but so in terms of like the property market, when we're talking about the property market here in Australia, so it actually helped people to consider Australia more as like a safe haven to invest in property. So especially from China. Australia's economy benefited from more stable property prices, partly due to the low interest rates influenced by global economic climate. So that was one of the things. And it actually boosted and increased market confidence in the US, which also impacted the property market here. So it actually had a positive effect from what I could understand. So I think, I don't know, that to me is slightly positive at least.
It could encourage
it could,
international
yes.
investment in Australia.
Yes.
The other thing is if markets are volatile, and if you don't know which way he's going to go, and the market is volatile, then people tend to invest in what they might consider to be safe havens.
Yes.
Which
And
typically
Australian
is-
property is typically one
It's
of
also
those.
like the US dollar is a
US dollar is
safe
one of
haven.
those as well.
Maybe
Correct.
Bitcoin these days has gone up 15% since he's been elected.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it has, eh?
What
Yeah,
was that?
Absolutely.
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Yeah, crypto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crypto.
Yeah, totally.
Crypto, a safe
I don't know
haven.
crypto. I know I've only looked at
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe separate them.
True.
But like, I mean, even the markets, the US markets have responded, but the Chinese market has responded as well.
What was that response?
Well, there's obviously stimulus being pumped into the China economy at the moment, but from the US market side of things, there's definitely been a positive reaction, whether it's on the Nasdaq or the S&P. There's been an increase. It's been about 4 or 5% already. I think, for example, you know, Tesla's stock was up 12% already.
Well, didn't he didn't Elon
He backed the right
Musk,
horse, didn't he?
He did $2 billion or something. He
Which
put
is
in as a
interesting.
bet.
But it's interesting
Yeah.
because part of some of Donald's policies is not to mandate electric cars, right? So it's quite interesting to see that dynamic. He's very much, you know, drill. What's the word? Drill, baby, drill. In terms of the oil side.
Oh,
of
yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
you know, there's concerns that they're saying that a lot of his policies are going to be inflationary. When I think, you know, from the 2016 to 2020 period, it wasn't inflationary at all. In fact, inflation started during COVID when the money printing machines were turned on in a massive way. That's when inflation actually started, not really from some of his policies. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, again, is there a gaslighty element to the media at the moment, saying, you know, trying to put the fear in. One thing I do believe is they're going to wait. The RBA will wait and see what some of these policies will do,
As
and
they should.
that might
Yeah.
have it's going to have the effect that they're going to wait and see effectively, in terms of what they do with the cash rate. I don't think they're going to look to move the cash rate until they see the impacts or what he's actually going to do.
Like, that seems like a smart choice, right?
China's the interesting one. It keeps coming up, right? And because how will they react? So if Trump does put a 60% tariff on Chinese products, right, then what does China do? Because they're our biggest trading. Well, we trade with China more than any other country in the world.
It's our biggest trading.
Our biggest trading partner. So what will they do? Are they going to try and increase tariffs on us to try and gain what they're losing on the other side? Like, is there this whole domino effect that may happen? And what effect could that have?
Look, again, this is speculation, but I mean, China's been through this before in the 2016 to 2020 period. Have they been preparing for this? Surely there'd be an assumption. There'd be a what if scenario. What if Trump gets in? What if? Surely for the last few years, and maybe that's the formation of BRICS.
Maybe they have a computer too.
Maybe they have a computer. They've been a big supercomputer. But like, there's been nations that have been put together, the BRICS formation.
Yeah.
So there's a few countries now involved in that, an alternate to US trade.
Yeah.
Is that in preparation for some of the tariffs that are about to come on with China? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Jace?
Well, that's the question that the journalist actually asked the Chinese Foreign Ministry, and the spokeswoman said that we don't comment on speculation, right? So they basically just said, we encourage cooperation for win-win outcomes, pretty much the standard response all the time. But I think the thing that is worth talking about is the impact of tariffs, right? It's like tariffs, from my understanding, actually affects the American consumer. Right, so if Trump puts tariffs on China, like, the goods are still going to get imported, right, with the tariff, but ultimately, the American consumer are the ones that's going to be paying for it, right? Because, for example, if Walmart is going to import, let's say, bicycles or whatever from China, and now the prices have gone up 60%, like, they're still going to import them from China because that's the manufacturing base.
He's just making China pay for it, right?
Right.
But ultimately, China pays for it, but then ultimately the consumer pays for it.
Ultimately, the consumer, like, Walmart is not going to wear it.
So is that inflationary?
Right, yeah. So that's where I think that's possibly inflationary, that people are going to pay for more. Because it's the same thing with EVs, right? So if China's exporting EVs, let's say to Europe, because I think they can't export EVs to the US. If you're putting tariffs on the EVs, like, the EVs are going to cost more for the consumer. Like, the manufacturer of the EV is not going to wear the cost, right? So they're going to make it more expensive. So the distributor of the EV is going to pass that cost on. So tariffs really, I think, politically sounds really good for the country that you're protecting. We're really standing up against cheap goods. But ultimately, it's the American consumers that are the ones that are going to suffer.
Yeah, demand isn't going to decrease.
Because some of the things, like, you're still going to buy, unless you start changing the manufacturing base and go, you know what, we're not going to import bicycles from China. We're going to manufacture bicycles in the US.
Trying to encourage
that's the intention.
That's
right?
his intention, right?
Yeah.
It's just so
but
fun.
it may not make business sense.
No.
Because there's a reason why the US are not manufacturing certain goods.
Well,
and
same as us
importing
here,
it from
right?
another
There's a
country.
reason we don't manufacture.
Exactly right.
There's a reason why we dig up our earth for iron ore and send it in ships
100%.
across the China.
There's a
comes back as
reason.
steel.
There's a reason the Holden factory is closed.
Like, there's a
right?
We never have a car industry.
That's
here.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny that, I mean, we recorded an episode recently about negative gearing and what how that affects the property market. But really, the biggest impact seems to be
the property market,
the
not
property
bloody
market,
shares.
not
But anyway,
shares, Jason.
We know it applies to shares.
Jason,
Don't worry.
sit down, guys. Sit down. But really, the biggest impact seems to be what America's doing and American inflation and how that eventually gets to our shores. So we're talking about rates going up and up and up and up until America cut their rates, and all of a sudden we're like, in February rates are going to be cut.
Well, they just cut them last night as well.
Yes, exactly right.
Oh, in the US.
I
didn't hear this. Can you?
By 25 basis
25
points.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they've cut 75 points in the last couple of
last 2 months. Yes.
right. So the if you follow that trajectory in Australia,
Well, the point is, there's all this media talk about Trump's going to be inflationary, but then they cut rates.
Yeah.
So again, there's a gaslighty sort of effect of media. Probably the fear factor of Trump component, right? That they're trying to continually put that message out there. Trump's coming in, it's going to be all bad. But again, the history in 2016 and 2020 was probably some of the best economic times, right? Socially, yes, it's different. China probably did it pretty tough from a tariff perspective. Yeah. But generally, I mean, he's a businessman at the end of the day. Yeah. So he's applying a business approach to the economy, which is good and bad. It has positives and negatives, right? Yeah. As any policy does, right? There's positives, there's winners and losers out of any policy stance.
And what I'm saying, I guess, is the beauty is with America, we seem to follow on months later. We'll be able to see it coming. Whatever he implements, whatever changes he implements. If we're all sitting back waiting for this rate cut in February, which everyone seems to agree is happening.
Aussies don't just sit back.
I mean, we're just going to, right? But then by that time, if there's huge inflation in America, we probably know that by the end of the year, we're going to see that on our shores too. Like, it feels predictable in a way. I don't know, but I find it all very interesting.
Yeah. But I think that's where they can make it political, right? Because I think I read this morning that he put Jerome Powell into that position, right? So Trump appointed the current Reserve Bank, the Fed governor, right?
I
So
think he came out saying, I'm not going to resign.
yeah, that's right. But Trump was the one that put him there. So then it makes you think,
Great guy.
like the rate reduction of yesterday was also related to the ease of employment. So maybe they do operate independently, but I think the media can make a story out of it, right? Like saying that because he's coming in, maybe they're afraid they're dropping the rates now because the rates might be going up, and just creating something from nothing, right? Because you could look at it objectively too.
So looking at the Australian market, right? So tariffs on China, what impact does that, as our biggest trading partner, what impact could that have, for example, on the supply of construction materials to Australia, which we know have been going up and up and up for 2 or 3 years now in the construction industry? That's obviously going to push up housing, the cost to deliver a house. That's going to obviously affect the ultimate price of a property and even the feasibility of a project, can they go ahead or not? What impact do we think tariffs on China from the US could have on construction materials or the import of materials from China to Australia?
Well, there's certainly possibility of retaliation, right? Because tariffs are very useful if you're the much more powerful country and the bigger country against some little country, right? But China and the US are pretty much on equal footing these days, right? So that's why China's not so afraid. Even China's approach to the EU is that if you're going to impose tariffs on us, then it's going to be a situation of a trade war, right? So nobody really benefits in that sort of situation.
But economically, China at the moment, compared to 2016 to 2020, is in a much weaker position at this point.
Yeah.
Given they're pumping stimulus into the economy, the construction sector. I mean, in the last 4 years, we've seen what's happened with the large construction sector in China. Are they in a weaker position than what they were economically in 2016 to 2020? Will the tariffs affect China in a much more aggressive way than what happened in the past? And then again, if China has issues economically, that will absolutely affect us. It could be a disruption in supply chains, for example, which probably why I think those BRICS nations were, that pact was formed to sort of hedge against some of the issues that the US could potentially impose. But disruptions to supply chain could be a big issue. In terms
Well, it's
of
massive. And we saw what was it, 40-50% increase in cost of materials has done to the property industry, right?
Well, it shelved a lot of projects.
Projects are shelved. Less supply, higher prices, because
It's meant builders go under.
builders are going under because projects don't stack up anymore.
How about
right?
the Australian dollar dropping in value? Like, how will that play into this? Potentially, because of a result.
I don't see it affecting the Australian dollar. I mean, interest rates is what affects the Australian dollar primarily. I don't actually see it affecting the election and some of his promises directly affecting the Australian dollar. What I do see affecting the Australian dollar is interest rates.
Well, the dollar
between the different nations.
So you know this more than I would, but am I right in saying that our dollar sort of goes up if the American interest rates are going down and ours are staying the same?
It starts to get closer.
It gets closer.
It'll definitely, at one point back in 2007, 2008, when the Aussie dollar was heading towards parity, it was at $1, and I think it peaked at $1.10 to the US dollar. That's when rates were at very different levels. I mean, as they start to level out, you'll see fluctuations in the dollar, but it's primarily controlled by interest rates, not necessarily a policy from Trump about immigration or tariffs or taxes. It's primarily affected by interest rates.
You can see all the Aussies planning their international holidays as our dollar comes closer to parity.
Just use the saving tips.
What other policies, Chris? What else could he do that could have an effect on us?
Well, I mean, the interesting one, it's very indirect, but I wonder if the interesting one is immigration. So he's coming out saying, he wants to build the wall, or the wall that's already built. I think it's there from 2016. Build the wall, but
built.
Also get illegal immigrants out of the country, who I'm assuming would be working. I think there was about 12 million illegal immigrants in America at the moment, from estimates. I mean, if you go aggressively and take all of them out of the country, I mean, what if they're working and doing jobs?
Yeah.
How do they know if they're illegal? How many illegal immigrants there are? It's the survey from everywhere that tells that result.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm sure there's ways for them to know, but it's probably about where they are. But I mean, what effect does that have? Does that have inflationary effects? And is that going to result in the unemployment rate dropping in the US, and therefore interest rates? What impact could illegal immigration have?
Yeah.
And does that mean more immigrants wanting to come here? Is that another question as well? Because we already have.
They're illegal, so
No, well, they are illegal.
I mean, it'd be
Oh,
quite
look, but
far
I
to
think
come.
the uncertainty in that country, because I saw
Yeah.
something yesterday about Tom Hanks posting that he's leaving the US.
Yeah,
is,
and everyone was like, "Well, go." If you
I don't know if
yeah.
this is like, like just trolling or whatever, but he's talking about leaving the US because it's
It's
so
probably for other
bad,
reasons,
this
yeah.
and that, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so
I heard Tom
think,
Hanks is moving to Byron Bay.
Like
That's
Zac
the
Efron.
kind.
Yeah.
That's the kind
well,
of immigration.
that's going to have an impact
that
on the
could-
property
yeah,
price.
yeah.
So I think if there's a lot of uncertainty in that country, certainly I think it can influence people's decision on where they study, where they migrate, and I'm not talking about the legal immigrants, right? Where people want to settle down. It can have an impact and influence on our migration numbers. People want to choose countries that are more stable, right? Politically more stable. For example, that's why Canada, for example, Australia is very popular countries for migrants making the move, right? So,
But in terms of political stability, I mean, the last year with Joe Biden, I mean, he's effectively been a walking corpse. Like, it's just
Yeah.
well, like literally, or
like you see,
It's like
like you
Weekend
see
at
some of the
Bernie's.
videos, and for whatever, like it's sad to see.
yeah,
But it's been vacant. So God knows who's been running the country. It couldn't have been
Yeah,
Joe Biden.
he probably
It's
wasn't
impossible.
the best leader.
So I mean, he wasn't the best leader in any
Mm.
case.
So was it the vice president?
I think
Maybe.
it's different people altogether. To be but
That's another
He was just
conspiracy.
a public figure.
I don't know if that's a conspiracy.
that's another computer.
So
in
you
the
say
US.
are you saying it's more stable now with Trump than it was?
Look, I don't know if it's going to be more stable. I think he's a strong leader.
Mm.
So I think if America has a strong leader, then a strong America is ultimately good for Australia. It is. I'll be interested to see sort of what happens with some of the wars. Of course, Ukraine and Russia. What's happening in the Middle East? I'll be very curious to see what unfolds in those two regions.
Me too.
Um,
Because at the moment, I mean, a lot of you look at our oil prices, for example, they always spike they're spiking due to conflicts over there, in Middle East and Europe, right? Now, Trump, if he does what he says he's going to do, can probably put an end to those wars in 24 hours, he says, right?
Probably.
Look, 24 hours or not, but, I think his relationships with the Putins of the world will help those situations.
There seem to be. There's a relationship there, right? There seems to be a
Definitely,
level
right?
of respect between them. So
Yeah.
I mean, he's
So-
a businessman. He'll cut a deal and it'll be over. I'd imagine that's what happened.
So-
I think the Middle East one's a bit more complex.
Definitely, and always has been, and I don't think anyone's been able to stop that, either Trump or no. But surely that is positive when it comes to oil prices and inflation and things like that for us as well.
Well, that's. I mean, if he's got tax policies where he wants to have tax cuts, corporate tax rates to 15% from 21%, like he wants to continue those, that can have inflationary effects. But then if you've got there's other factors that could offset the inflation, such as a lower oil price, for example. I mean, the US has some of the largest oil reserves in the world. That are some of the shale reserves in there. So they have some of the largest reserves that are untapped that they could start drilling and drop oil prices. That was one of the big issues that happened when the Biden administration came in. They stopped oil production, and that's when oil started to spike. And that was a huge problem. I keep saying that in terms of the inflation story, oil is a massive factor. So if you've got a strong, stable supply from a local supply of oil, then that's a huge factor. So that's why I think Donald knows that. So getting that up and running is going to be critical to the next 4 years for him and the stability of the economic environment there.
All right, I'm a Trump supporter.
You're a Trump supporter.
I'm joking.
Ooh, sad.
Yeah.
That's on record.
What I notice is that, like from the stuff that you're talking about, it makes a lot of sense. I find with Donald Trump, what's interesting is that public perception.
That's
when
the
we're
issue.
talking about the uncertainty, the instability, it may not necessarily be that his policies creating stability, right? So from what you're talking about, a lot of stuff does make sense, but I think it's his public persona that creates that perception that the media can run stories of, that he's erratic, he's unstable, or he makes decisions quickly, this and that, right? That can create that perception, So, but that sort of stuff makes a lot of sense, and that might be why that he's got the popular vote.
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because when he first got elected,
Yeah.
I think everyone was surprised.
Yeah.
But this time around, I don't think that was a surprise.
Yeah,
I think
well,
he was a
Depends
win.
if you ask the media.
Depends
they
who you
want
ask,
it to
but
feel like a surprise.
yeah,
But I
mate,
don't think it was
everyone,
a
a
surprise.
lot of people, Sav aside, but a lot of people I spoke to were like, Trump's in. Trump's
Yeah,
getting to be in.
yeah.
Like, but whereas last time around, I think the bookies had him at, I think the bookies had Clinton at $1.10, and I heard a lot of stories of people putting money down to get that 10% return and failing miserably because it was a massive shock last time.
Yeah.
But this time around, it's not a shock. Which again, I'm saying this a lot today. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people maybe struggle to separate their dislike for him, and particularly females, because he is very abrupt, and some of the things he's done in the past have been horrible, right?
And said. Yeah.
And said, yeah, right.
Yes.
Like Rosie O'Donnell comment, like some of these comments, right? Like it's very divisive as a president, and that's where you lose a lot of people.
You don't have to like
and a lot
him.
of people can't get
Yeah.
past that.
Yeah.
Right? And I get that.
I could have done this like the Republican Party, because I think if you just look at the policies, it's different. But I think him as a leader is concerning. That's I suppose where I stand on that.
All right, guys. This podcast obviously brought to you by Coposit, who doesn't take a political stance, but you can buy property with 10K. You can secure property with 10K. Check out the website. Download the app. Very good. So knowing all of this whole discussion that we've had about Donald Trump, and it's all speculation, of course, but let's bring it back to the topic. Will Donald Trump's 4 years in power affect the property market here in Australia? I'm going to go around the room and let's round off the conversation in this way. He-Man?
Look, I think it's still the same thing that I'll be watching on what is going to affect the property market, and that's what Chris has been saying is interest rates.
Yep.
Right, because really that's what it's all about. If interest rates can come down in Australia, you're going to unlock greater borrowing capacity. There's more confidence in the property market. That's going to increase the property prices. If the interest rates don't move, or even if the rates go up, that's going to affect the property prices. So, I think if you take away all the sort of macro stuff around what I've also mentioned, the US is uncertain. People are going to be investing at assets like property over shares and so forth. You know what? Yeah, it's so macro, right? Chris has debunked that myth that when he was in power, or even just recently now, that the shares have gone up, right? So maybe it's it's not a bad thing, right? So I'm just looking at interest rates alone, still just following what the IBA is going to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sav?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you look at the last time he was president, it didn't seem to have much of an effect on the Australian property market, not as much maybe as we anticipated. So I think, yes, looking at it locally is probably a better way of anticipating what's going to happen.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be business as usual for the property market, to be honest. I mean, we saw what happened in 2016 and to 2020 in those 4 years, which was a great time for property. Went even better during COVID. I mean, the last 10 years for Australian property has been a crazy time. I think we're particularly coming off a low base in any way from a development perspective for new supply out of the ground. Governments, or whether it's a local, state or federal governments here in Australia, are all talking about the housing supply crisis. They're all talking about how to get more homes into the economy. So I think, Donald or not, I think the next 4 years in Australia for property is going to be much of the same for what we've seen in the last 10 years. And again, as Jace mentioned, the interest rates, a critical factor to property and the confidence perspective. If we start to see rates drop off in 2025, then we're going to see the property market increase. Maybe it's going to mean more people want to come to this amazing country. As always, immigration levels have been at record highs. They continue to be. Everyone wants to come to Australia. It is the best place to live. So I think property prices, they're going to continue to go up as we've seen, and I think we're going to continue to see more supply come into the market. Hopefully, and I think the one part that I'd like to see over the next few years is to see the supply. I mean, if there are tariffs done or imposed on China, what does that do to the material supply in the construction sector? Does that raise prices? Does it make it very difficult? Do some Chinese firms or manufacturing plants go out of business because they can't be profitable because of the tariffs? Do they find ways to bypass? I think that will be the really interesting piece, particularly over the last few years in Australia, and the effect that it's had on the construction cost of materials in particular. What are those tariffs going to mean for the construction industry. That's the differing factor from 2016 to now.
The supply part is the bit I'm not sure about yet, right? But in terms of if you're talking about interest rates, I would confidently put my hand up and say right now, based on current information, rate cut in February, right? And I don't think anything that happened politically in America overnight is going to change that. I could be wrong, and ask me again in December and January, and we'll probably continue to have these discussions. Like, my mind will change if the data changes, but I can't see that changing between now and February. And then I think from there, I think our dollar will become more competitive. I think Australia is always a great place to be. People always want to be here. I think from what we see in our business, developers are doing their best to get out of the ground and build more. We see government, we see Australian, whether it's state or federal governments, making changes to policies that are trying to help with that as well. So again, the supply piece is critical. And what's the price of goods going to be next year? That's the biggest piece. And if it's not too bad, then I think it's good news for property in 2025 here in Australia. Trump or no, really. So I guess that's the way I round it out. Great conversation, guys. Probably the best podcast ever. I have to end it that way. I'm gonna watch this back and go, Michael, fuck, that was a terrible impression. Hey, Michael, what do you do? Sorry, guys. Great chat as always. Good to have you all here. See you all next time.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
The Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only, and they are general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. Always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.